hi, friends and relatives. Welcome back to another episode of The Glorious Mess with the messiest bitch of them all. Me, and also my best friend and icon legend statement star, Justin Mulrain, is joining me this week. Hello, Justin.
Hello. Hi.
We were really unsure of where to go because I think we've lived so many lives, let's say that, and there's so many spaces we could go in terms of issues of race, your work as an influencer, general toxic gay culture, white gays. you know the the list could really and truly go on, but when we were talking earlier, we came to the conclusion that talking about loss and grief would be a really important thing. And I think now more than ever, we're all kind of always experiencing loss, especially since the pandemic. There's been this cycle of loss, and there was a quote that every death impacts at least three individuals. And so when we multiply that by the amount of people who died through the pandemic, the reality is I think a lot of us are in a state of grief. A lot of us are in a state of processing loss, whether that was loss of a loved one, loss of a friend's loved one, whether that was loss of a job, loss of reality as we knew it. So in a lot of ways, we're all grieving, right? And so anyway, I thought, let's talk about it. Let's
Yeah.
talk about it. I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that, Justin?
No, there's a lot that's happened. I mean, I think loss in general, we're still kind of coming out of a cycle in 2023, especially where we're dealing with all forms of loss. And I think, something to remember is in 2020, 2021, I mean, people lost in different ways, whether it's a job, their mental health, their wellness. There were so many different practices that came into play, and I feel like they really just never kind of had a moment to really reflect on that and kind of look at how they could address that. They just kind of moved on to other things. So I think it's a great topic overall, and I think it's a good segue to see what could happen.
Yeah, see. Well, and so I'll tell you, so everyone listening, just to separate the two. So there's loss. The loss is like the physical thing, maybe not the physical thing, but the act itself. Loss happens, and it can be job, it can be friendships, can be your keys. If it's me, I always lose my fucking keys.
or, oh,
And my dignity whenever I'm in Calgary. But that's another story. But loss. But we talk about grief. Grief is the process or the journey you go on to actually process that loss, and that traditionally speaking, like people think it's just emotional,
yeah,
but it is physical. It's cognitive. If you lost a partner who you really relied on for or for regulating yourself through maybe anxiety, and then you lost that partner, now you're really independent or dependent on yourself to process through some of those uncomfortable emotions. And so that is a part of it. How it affects us cognitively, like it has so many layers of ways it can impact us. And there was like, I don't know, do you remember the like 5 stages of grief?
I think so. I don't remember the first two, but maybe the last three.
No, I only ever remember the first and the last, because the first one is denial.
Yeah.
And that's like the disbelief of that the thing has even happened. And then there's the end of the spectrum, which is acceptance. And then in there they label 3, but I instead say no. I would rather see it in a circular way, in a sense that like maybe it can start with denial, but and you're all working towards acceptance, but like it keeps kind of going and going. Like there are times where I don't even think about, like, I don't know, I'll be on a bus and a scent. I will smell a scent that will remind me of my Aunt Dorothy. And then next thing you know, I feel like the weight behind my eyes, and bitch, there's like a little tear shed. You and I think like that's the crazy thing about it. So I always say it's like you're working towards acceptance, but you're kind of continuously on this wheel, and I don't know, I don't think it's ever over. It's almost like a new journey.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like with denial in the process of that too is the actual process and the understanding of it too. I feel like when it comes to, I know for me personally, there's just so many different ways of kind of dealing with it. I feel like some people's instinct, emotional way of dealing with it is going right to crying or feeling upset or just
Yeah.
kind of basically using that as some sort of, initial right away, that's what's going to happen. I
Yeah.
feel everybody has a specific way and they kind of skip what I've noticed, I guess, a little bit in terms of grief that I've seen and how people handle grief is they kind of skip that first step.
Hmm.
And really just taking a moment to understand and really ask yourself how you're feeling right now. And it's literally just sitting there and asking yourself, what, like how do I feel right now? And
Hmm.
process, yes, there can be a little bit of denial that will happen too because your brain is still feeling exhilarated. You're still trying to process and
Yeah.
you're on the worst high of everything that's still happening because you're still trying to understand what really happening. But it's important, I guess, in a way to kind of just process your emotions and to
Yeah.
just take a deeper look and ask yourself and understand. Another unique way to kind of do it too is to just, even if you have to write down 3 words to describe how you are feeling right in that moment, it can
Mm.
really help you kind of build a little bit more of an understanding in your process as you navigate through. And, like you said, it could be through a partner, it could be through a job, it could be through somebody physically,
Yeah.
but at least taking that moment to understand really kind of puts things into perspective and helps build a better path to grief.
No. And time, my God, this time it takes time, it's it's and it's not easy work. And I think that's a good segue into just sharing with our listeners. Like, I think we agreed, like focusing a bit on like the loss of family members, in our conversation and connecting to our lived experience. And, I think for me, we just had another passing in our family. And there's this word, they call it complicated grief. And I think that's, at least for me, like, so I lost my Auntie Dean. We just had the anniversary 8 years ago, and that one's always a tough one for me because like she was the cool fucking aunt, and her legacy, she really was this fighter. The way she could
Living
play
life.
a system and play a slot machine, like she was a badass. I remember like we were younger, she'd come home from the clubs and she would make us like fried pork and like garlic cheese bread like at 2 in the morning, and she would belt Mariah Carey, like Mariah Carey concert. And I loved it. Like this woman was so filled with love. I almost felt like I was one of her kids in a lot of ways. Like I felt like I was one of her kids truly. And so she had passed, and she was one of the ones who really kept our family together in a lot of ways. And so she passed. That definitely felt complicated in that the version and how I had her in my early years wasn't necessarily the version she was towards the end of her life, but I had to still honor who she was and who she is in this weird kind of messy way. And then a few years later, then we lose my Aunt Dorothy, another person who again brought our family together. Some of my best memories with her, who was really my, like, in a lot of ways she was my grandma. um like, I hope, like, if my grandma's listening to this, like, no, I love her with all my heart, but for me, my great Aunt Dorothy was really felt like my grandma. She really was who that was for me. So then, she passed, and then, now most recently, then we also lost my grandma's partner, which is basically my step grandpa, John. And again, he was the man who showed me like camping. I never had been camping really before. He like took me and my cousin slash uncle Pete um camping. He's this brilliant chef. Um and so I sit with this, and I remember asking myself earlier this week, I'm like, holy fuck, does grief ever end? Does it?
Never, sometimes, unfortunately, and even when we have those year cycles or we have those anniversaries, it just is another reminder of how we're still processing everything, even though, and I find specifically, and I guess just to jump off a little bit, this time of the year specifically is a little bit harder than usual for myself.
Mhm.
Um, for the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, there has always been a family member that has died between February and like sometime this week,
Mm.
probably somewhere closer to April too. And so, and even today, I was just sitting down because a week from today too will be, I think, 4 years for my dad too. And so, aside from this, that was all happening in this discussion, it was just a moment for me today to sit and just to kind of understand, like the last 4 years just went by, but I just had to ask myself, have I really had a moment to like think about everything and like still understand it? And I think periodically it's just those moments kind of hit a little bit harder when the anniversaries come around, but they kind of still come without or come throughout the year.
Mhm.
And it's very difficult to process sometimes too. And I'm still trying to understand kind of where I'm at right now with it. And it's just kind of like, it's kind of like when those anniversaries come, you're reliving it all again. And
Yeah.
you're not living it all again for the moments that were, well, you can for the moments that were great, but you're kind of just living, I feel like, that trauma again of,
Yeah.
of that immediate moment when that happened and where you were and how you were feeling
Mhm.
and how everything was processed. So this time of the year is very difficult, but I'm just taking those moments to kind of process it and kind of remember the better parts of things rather than going to the place of negative stuff and like sad stuff.
Mhm. When how do you make space for like I always ask myself like how do you make space for both? Because when it talked about that complicated grief, it's like, wow, holy fuck, there were some things in those last years that I really disappointed me, maybe in choices that were made. Um, but there's this foundational core memory of greatness, and awe, and some of my earliest, adult relationships and foundational relationships. And it's like we want to remember the thing. And I was thinking of this phrase, like your body keeps the score. And like we have these like reptilian brains, and they're really just there to make us survive. Right. Like
Yeah,
that's they were just there to, and so whenever we like are activated or triggered by a memory, we literally go back to that same place. And then it's our body being like, hey, this was uncomfortable. Let's avoid it. And
yeah,
the secret is we have to say, like, no,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
feel it. Like, do you
yeah.
remember? This is going to be controversial. I'm so sorry for anyone listening. I know that I stand with all of the survivors of R. Kelly, but like R. Kelly's I Wish is
Right.
like the song that makes me weep. And when I was a kid, one of my friends from school died, and that song was on, and I to this day could put that on and I will just ball. And so anyway, I understand. I apologize to anyone who's offended. R. Kelly's trash and he's in jail, thank God. And but that song had
Yeah,
such a massive emotional impact. And it was a way that it allowed me to release those sad emotions. Like
yeah.
totally.
Totally. No, yeah. And I remember everything from that night too. And there's a song I don't remember, but when it plays, like it comes on, it just plays. I remember, I believe it was, I don't remember exactly, but there was a song that played that night
Yeah.
when everything happened. And every time, this time of the year, it just kind of pops up randomly, like in my listing of songs and stuff.
Mhm.
And it just kind of, again, the lead up to it just kind of made me reprocess those moments. But I guess jumping back to a moment too, we didn't always have, and this isn't just for me and my dad, but other family members that have kind of passed during this time, we didn't always have the closest relationship. But it was the things that I kind of got as human skills today and lifelong skills today that I really kind of remember in those moments and kind of look at their memories and how I handle grief as a positive thing instead of a negative thing. I
Mhm.
mean, there have been moments for sure that I wish that, specifically my dad or other family members could have been here just to keep everything full circle. But,
Yeah.
you know, having those moments when I reflect on how that has shaped me and how I am today kind of
Mhm.
really changes those thoughts of feeling sad and feeling that loss of wishing that, he was here right in this moment to see, because I still feel that. I do feel that still here, and other family members are still here. But it's remembering that, I have life skills and I am where I am, and I still in some ways feel supported, even though he's physically here. I feel that it's kind of like a ghost hand on your shoulder. Still
Yeah.
feeling like you have that guidance. But yeah, it's a really difficult journey, and I didn't realize my full the grieving process was a little bit difficult. Like, I will admit right away. I mean, everybody, and I know, the time leading up to it was a very difficult time. I mean, as much as I was still laughing, smiling, like showing up, it was difficult. I mean, you go home and you're smiling for everybody, and then when you go home and you actually sit with yourself, you actually feel hurt and upset and
Yeah.
disgusted. And especially when you don't have a close relationship, you start to think about all that wasted time, and you start to feel guilt because of that. And so for me, you know there was kind of those feelings of upset and wishing the reality wasn't happening. And then it happened, and after the process was really just kind of, okay, now I have a void, there's a gap. What
Yeah.
do I do now in life, and what do I do moving forward? And I didn't really start to actually grieve, I think, probably until after the first year anniversary, because then it really processed for me, this is the reality of life now. And I feel like the reason why it was because of that was because of all those monumental kind of occasions, birthdays, holidays, all those kind of moments really just were always a reminder of what I didn't have. And for me, it was just kind of a reminder of that pain and that struggle, and trying to understand how to do, or how to get around it rather.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a journey.
The
And
fucking
it's a journey. It's a
and
trap.
I don't know, do you ever find this too? Like sometimes I'm so guilty of it, and I know my family members are listening, so I'm sorry, but I almost feel like I pull more away from my family members in times of grief. And I was thinking about like I know I'm a really empathetic person, so when I'm around grief or addictions or suffering in any way, it's really hard for me to take it on. And so I see, and then those people who passed on were really people who brought the family together too. So I find there's like a kind of like this like push and pull of like, oh, okay, I love you all, I do, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like I still to this day sometimes don't want to accept the reality of what it was. And so if I keep a distance away from people who knew those people, then I don't have to like accept the truth almost, you know?
Yeah. And so I thought of that too. But then I think when in my process of grieving too, I also felt as if that was maybe a way. And once I kind of went to the therapy sessions too, it kind of told, or kind of made me understand that that's a way of kind of numbing my emotions a little bit too, because I feel like I don't want to be around as often, because I don't want to really handle or feel like I have to be at the same emotional wavelength as everyone. And I remember having conversations with family after the fact that everything had happened, and said that everybody else processes things different. And in the process and the understanding of that too, it also kind of depends on your emotional connection to that person as well too. I think that plays a big factor. But I can 100% agree. There is that push and pull, and I know especially the first 3 months after dealing with any sort of, well, that grief immediate. I just wasn't really wanting to engage too much. I think it was just very difficult for me, because I feel like I was needing to be more of a support rather than an included person to kind of feel the same way. And I feel like everyone more or less wanted me. There was always that expectation that I was supposed to be crying and like super upset and super emotional about everything.
Yeah.
And I think my way, rather than including myself in that, I think my way of handling that was to kind of pull away a little bit, and to kind of really just process it on my own, and just to kind of, if you, unfortunately, it sounds like, the poor habits you can make sometimes too, whether it's, indulging in fast food or like drinking or all those sort of things. I think that definitely was a way of coping with it a little bit too,
Yeah.
especially for 3 months, rather than seeking the advice and seeking the support around from everyone. But it was kind of that way of getting out of everything and kind of that feeling to avoid that oh, we need you here, oh, this special occasion's coming up, oh, have you thought about this, or are you going to be here for this? It was kind of a way to just kind of avoid those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had it's like sometimes I think in the journey that it is, it's like you have to take those times sometimes for yourself and be like, you know what, I'm not fucking ready yet, and that's okay. And then also though, at some point you have to face it, and those people can be, my mom and my brother have been some of the best people to really help me process through, because that damn alcohol, what a great blessing alcohol can be, because I remember drinking and not thinking it was connected to like soothing that pain and discomfort and trying to avoid, but then I would get like Rashida level. And then I would be like crying. I'd call my mom or my brother just like crying, or like family members talking about like all of these things. And I was like, oh my God, it was like the reminder to be like, oh, I need to deal with this, because if I don't deal with it, I'm gonna become I'm gonna become that girl. I don't want to be.
And I can agree with that too. I would probably say, especially in 2018, 2019, I mean, I was in my wild child era. I was very
there.
wild. I was wild, but I think a lot, and now looking on the other side of it too, and this is something that I've really realized about myself too, and having now gone through therapy and understanding it, I think when I look at that, that was a way of me coping through a lot of this stuff. I mean, everything kind of really came crumbling down in 2015, but I feel like there was so much promise on everything's going to be better. Everything could be better. Everything could probably be better. And that started to become a false reality for me. And the long term outcome began to set in, and that processing kind of kicked in. And I feel in ways I may have grieved that loss a little bit earlier than when it actually happened. And I feel like when it actually happened, I feel like by then I had already kind of dealt with it a little bit more heavier, because I was excessively drinking and I was kind of doing everything a little bit more aggressively. And I feel like maybe I would say with that 2 year span, it was literally just that. And I feel like that was the time that I was just dealing with it because I wasn't really sure how to deal with it. And I never dug into my emotions on how I actually was feeling about what was going on. Never during that at all. It was just, you guys want to go party tonight? Let's go party.
Next club.
Yeah, we're gonna go turn up, and just never really having discussions with family about how I feel. And that wasn't just myself; that was with all family members. Just not talking about it. Just I was more so asking about, is he fine, or is this situation going to be fine? And again, like once that was just beginning to dwindle, like that's when my way of dealing with everything began to get worse.
Yeah. Well, and I wondered, this kind of just the thought just kind of hit me while I'm hearing you, is like, because I think for both of us, for our families, like we're like the bright energy, the joy that, and so I think for me, sometimes I'm scared to be there for my family in a way that's like vulnerable, because I've never been that. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's like I'm always the fun person. I bring the energy to the room. I'm talking. I'm doing great in life. Everything's good. Everything's fine. And I find it hard to connect or communicate when I can't be that. And but that's the very thing I need to be, and they're the very people who can help me through it. Like I think of the conversations I've had with my mom. We were having one, like I think it was in January or February. Like I was just like, I was just crying, but it was so healing and so therapeutic, and it was because I was able to be comfortable with my mother in that moment, and talk about kind of the complexity of everything that's going on for the family. So it's like the same thing. The thing you want to avoid is the very thing you need to do to get to the next place, but that doesn't mean you want to do it right now, and that's also okay too.
But yeah, it can happen. And I think for me, what I've also understand in that process too is we do need to be around our family and get that understanding from our family. But what I've also understood too is that sometimes our family, in specific our mom, sometimes they need somebody to just listen to them. Sometimes there's so many people going to them saying, how do you feel about this, or how are you doing this? And it's just sometimes I feel like when there's so much coming, and that's where you're kind of saying when you're supposed to be that on personality, you kind of maybe taking them away from that a little bit. But sometimes I think it works. It kind of has to work both ways, and it gives that comfortability. Whereas you can go to them, be emotional with them, be vulnerable with them, but create that kind of conversation. Because I know with mine, it's a little bit difficult, but create that conversation that it's okay to be vulnerable. And if you're not feeling okay about something, just say, you know what, I woke up today, I'm not feeling that great about it, or I'm, missing this person today, or I'm missing, my job today, or missing something, like whatever it is, really. It's just having that clear communication.
Yeah. I love that. So now, Kate, let's take this twofold. So one, I want to know if there's any tips you can share with our listeners of like one thing you did to help you through the grieving process. And then on the flip end, because we love balance, we love
Yeah.
balance. On the flip end, one thing that other people did that was not helpful.
That was not helpful. I don't
Maybe
know.
start there.
Let's start backwards.
Start backwards.
One thing I would say, I think at the time, maybe I would probably say at the time when I was dealing with everything, I think maybe from the general public, I probably should have maybe been asked if I was really okay. Because I think there was an awareness of what's really going on. And I feel like at the time, I was very just pass and go about my emotions. And nobody really put me in check to ask me deeply, are you okay? Like, are you actually fine? And mind you, I shouldn't say that nobody did ask. People did ask, but I was also dismissive of it because I didn't really want to address it.
Yeah.
Could I maybe have gone a little bit deeper? Of course. Could the public have gone a little bit deeper? Of course. And when I say that, I mean, like your friends are there for support, families there for support, but also people on the day to day, like if you're working, like they're asking you and providing you with those supports at work, I feel like they should really give. And I will never forget, I remember at a time when everything was going on, there was a lot of stress, I guess, that had kind of come, especially from work. And I feel as if there was never really a time where it was, how are you doing? What can we do to support you? And what can we do to bring you to the other side of it? It was just kind of like, make a decision right now, what you want to do, where you want to go, how you're going to deal with this. And it just became another thing as a burden. And so, yeah, like I feel like that was one of those moments where I feel like I could have maybe felt a little bit more support. For sure. And it's not even just from family and friends. I feel like I got that. I feel like just maybe more so on the workforce.
Yeah.
Flip side, I guess you were saying what's one thing, with grief and how people could handle it. I think everybody has to be accepting of how everybody handles grief. For some people, it is, unfortunately, it is not healthy ways. And it also is ways that are unusual to us. But that's also under the umbrella of everybody handling grief differently. And I think, especially when, like, don't get me wrong, if you're drinking, doing drugs, all that sort of stuff, maybe it is time to have that interjection from somebody to really help you, guide you through that so that you're not going down a path of using that to cope. But if you are eating things that are your favorite, or just kind of staying at home, sleeping, or like kind of not really feeling like doing anything, it's okay to do that until a point that it's not okay. And I think what's challenging in that process of grief is you kind of really have to understand that a little bit for yourself and really pull yourself out of it.
Yeah.
But so you have to be transparent with people and allow other people to help pull you out of that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no another major thing too. There's no timeline on grief healing. Like you can be 3 months, you could be 6 months. I know I have family members, I know people that are still dealing with grief that happened 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's like a constant like stab to them because it's just a reminder of something that has happened over and over. And there are people in my family that are like that too, especially when not even just when the major milestone dates come,
Mm-hmm.
that 5 10 years, it could be like 7 years, and it's just a heavy reminder. And it's really what you do for yourself on that day and leading up to the time after that really is going to kind of navigate you through your grieving process. And what I mean like that, what I mean specifically to that is, you know, the first year is going to be the hardest. It's always going to be the hardest, the worst, the most traumatic to deal with. But this is what I kind of tell family now, it's what you do after the first year
Mm-hmm.
that really will help in that process of grieving. Because if you don't really address that, and whether that means you need to get into therapy, which I found to be helpful, or if it means you need to reach out to friends and family, or you need to take a trip or go and do something of your leisure to really help in that, it kind of really needs to happen after that first year. So
Yeah.
you can really understand your emotions and sit with your emotions and process them a little bit. So yeah, I think that's kind of, I know that's like a scattered point.
No.
Scattered point, like, but the biggest thing is there's no, I guess where I'm getting at with it, there's no timeline on grief. There
No.
is no timeline. You could process your grief. If you want to sit down and go and buy McDonald's tonight, 10, 20,
Every
30,
night.
go and buy nuggets. If you want to go and do that, if you want to be at the gym, if you want to go to the gym and you want to work out 2 times a day,
Yeah.
7 days, go for it. Everybody processes differently, but we also have to remember and take a step in that moment to understand ourselves and understand what is usual to us and what is unusual. And the moment we notice something that's unusual and unusually healthy, then we need to guide ourselves in a direction of seeking supports and resources to really help address those before they come to
Mm-hmm.
like something worse.
Yeah.
So
I love it. I imagined a visual of like just these intersecting, points in between.
yeah,
Remember we talked at the beginning about like denial, acceptance. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
and that's really what it is. And I think for me it was the thing that I actually think is was the least helpful and is the least helpful is the question. I don't know if anyone ever told you like, let me know if you need anything.
it's like yes, you're gonna do something.
It's like, bitch, yes, I am gonna need something. And I think to put onto the other person, like that they're dealing with everything, the grief that they're going through, but then to say, but I need you to reach out to me, I think is an easy way to help someone through the grieving process. And I encourage anyone listening, if someone is grieving, don't say, come to me, but instead set reminders for yourself and check on them. Hey, how are you doing? Like, hey, what's going on? Have you
What
talked about like,
can I do for you? That's a question I always like. It's just a better way of than saying, if you need anything, let me know. Like, what can I do for you? It's a better way to just address
yeah,
and be there.
no.
Yeah.
And then to leave it on a well note, what is my good thing that I think, everyone should try, and this is something that I did and I found it really healing, was because I like to write. I wrote letters to my loved ones, and I thought it was such a beautiful thing. Like I looked at like I googled some like journal prompts, but like it was like, what's one thing I never got to say to you that I wanted to say? What's one thing I really enjoyed about our time together? Um, that, and I found like that balance of questions of like accepting the complicatedness of it and recognizing the later parts of the years where the relationships were severed, but honoring what was. Like I really was able to do that through writing a letter to them. And I wrote the letters, I sealed it, I still have them in my memory box. And when those moments come up of grief and whatever that emotion feels like for you wherever you're at on the journey, you can go back to those or you can add to them. And I really thought was a really good way for me to be able to feel and release.
Yeah. It's a great way to just kind of put your emotions, your feelings, your happiness, your sadness, everything just on paper and just kind of almost like let it sit or let
Yeah.
it go in a way and just kind of really let your emotions out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have to release it. And speaking of release, that concludes our beautiful episode on grief. And Justin, I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing and your vulnerability. And for anyone who's listening and is touched by grief, and arguably that's really all of us at some point, I hope you make space to be yourself and do whatever you need to do for you, and keep looking at, just like Justin said, like, what's unusual, and if things are continuously unusual, how do you get back to your usual? How do you restore your balance, whatever that looks like for you? And how can you communicate that out to others to get you back to that place? So I wish you well on your healing journeys. We're all in this together, and we'll
Yeah.
talk to you soon.
Okay.